Such a lovely movie. You were already familiar with Demetri Martin's drawings and stand-up before you got involved with the project, is that right?
Um, so my son is a young filmmaker, Charlie McDowell, and he was a huge fan of Demetri's, and Charlie's the one that started talking to me about him. I think the first thing he did was sit me down and play some of his stand-up. I liked him so much that Charlie gave me a book of his for Christmas or something like that. And so then just shortly after that, it's like the way the world works, suddenly he's in my sphere of consciousness, and there he is calling to see if I'll be in his movie.
So what was he like to work with as a director? I mean, he's such a visual stylist as an artist. I mean, how did that translate as to being a director of a feature film?
I think the person you see up there is very much who he is. More so, I would say, than a lot of people that I work with that are playing themselves, He really, he's this weird combination of being very brilliant and imaginative, but not letting that having made him acerbic and too cool for school. And there's like this innocence combined with a deep intelligence and a great way of looking at life. And he himself has gone through true tragedy in his life for someone so young. I mean, I've seen that he's talked about this publicly. So I would say that, he lost his dad at quite a young age, and then his mom has early onset Alzheimer's. So she doesn't, I'm not, so that's been very challenging and sad. And so I think the dedication was to Lillian and Dean, and that's his parents, and I think that was his mom that you saw at the end. So when you know that and you look at the tenderness and he really made a film about something that's so important to his life, which is surviving loss and doing it with humor and tenderness and a lack of bitterness or poor me or any of those things, And I was and am completely enchanted by him. And in terms of the first-time directorness of it all, I've worked with a lot of first-time directors, and he like apologized 25,000 times a day for like every direction. Every direction. He would like, and I don't need to tell you. I'm like, Demetri, you're the director. I'm the actor. I actually like direction. I want to hear it. If you have the slightest thought, I want to hear it. And he did. I think he grew visibly more confident, and I'm sure he will be more so on his next film. And I think he's an important voice. I feel like he's the real deal,
Yeah, absolutely.
You agree. I'm glad.
And you've worked with other actor-directors and comedian directors. I mean, Woody Allen and Larry David. I know he doesn't direct it necessarily, but he's sort of the creative force behind Curb Your Enthusiasm. Do you find that they come at it from a different angle as performers, or is it just different from director to director by their personality?
They're just so different. Each one of the things about being an actor is that, I love it when some actors say to me, oh, you're not afraid to improvise? Like, I'm so scared to improvise. And I'm like, really? Because you improvise every single time you go to work, because every director is so different. And you're there to fulfill their vision and not to just stay stuck on your own, So I always feel like each one has been a completely unique experience. With Woody, one of the things I remember is doing a scene with Woody where this was in the film Midsummer Night's Sex Comedy, and we're in the kitchen, and I'm in the kitchen doing something or other, and Woody like pokes his head around the screen door looking at me. And I remember the first few times he did it, me going, oh my God, that's Woody Allen. And suddenly I wasn't even in the movie. I was just like watching a Woody Allen movie and had to remind myself to act, you know. With Larry on Curb, we don't have a script. So that's a really unique situation because every word is improvised. There is no script. And half the time I'm in my own clothes, you know. And it's not our house and it's not really our kids. And I probably drive a way fancier car on the show than I do in real life. We do improvise.
And how much improvising did you do with Kevin Kline? You'd worked with him before on Las Vegas, right?
I had worked with him on Las Vegas and also a lovely little movie called Life as a House, which actually came out, thank you. That movie came out on September 10th, the day before September 11th. Or it was, no, I think it showed at Toronto, September 10th. And then it was supposed to come out on September 11th and didn't even come out when it was supposed to and just got buried. But it's a very lovely little movie that Kevin is brilliant in. And then we did Las Vegas together, but we never had sort of scenes where we were romantic or anything like that. I was being romantic with other people. I'm just laughing because in Life as a House, I just realized it was my daughter's boyfriend. So that was weird. But not my real daughter, just my pretend daughter. So Kevin and I, we didn't really improvise that much, but this whole movie for me kind of was a blur because I was doing two TV shows at once, and I had a day to fly to New York, 2 days to shoot, and a day to fly home. And now, other than that, I couldn't do the part. And so, and I guess if the stories that Demetri told is true, I guess Kevin had asked if they could try to get me to play the part. And so I said, well, I can do it if we can shoot it all in 2 days. So the scene in the restaurant where we're eating together and talking about Demetri's character, Dean, that was at like 5 a.m. after having shot all day and all night, and the sun was coming up. I remember them having frantically trying to block out the windows because it was getting light.
So we don't know too much about your character's backstory in this movie, but we can sort of guess some of it from her reactions. Are you the kind of actor who creates that kind of thing for yourself, or do you need that to kind of prepare for the role?
More and more, I'm finding, as life has gone on, so much of all this stuff, I know I've lived a lot of it. But so the main thing is that I access that, you know, and Sandy Meisner was my teacher, and he used to say that none of that stuff mattered if it didn't translate into behavior. If it's just something rattling around your head so that you can show off how many facts you've got about your character, it's not really useful. On the other hand, being lazy about your character and not answering, not making her real for yourself is worse. So I think it's a balance for me. I don't know that I went through this woman's whole life and figured out what had happened to her, but I made the assumption that she got a divorce and that she was probably left for a younger woman, and which is always a good bet. But and so I understood that, and you know, really everybody in the movie is dealing with loss, so I made that real for myself, and also the vulnerability of any romantic relationship at this age, which would be a bad idea for me to do because I'm married. But but imagining it and having friends that go through it, and how, you know, there's some pluses and minuses. On the plus side, like, you don't want to play games anymore. It's like you're not gonna, whatever these rules are about how long you wait to call, blah blah blah. Like, I think you're over it. at this age, But on the other hand, you have loved, and maybe you're still in love, as Kevin's character is, with somebody else, that's not even around anymore. So it was very poignant to me, that storyline. And I think one of the things that's underexplored in movies is, love at this time of life, because it's a really interesting moment to look at it. There's so much going on, So that was a little part of it, but I hope someday to do a part that's really about that.
You mentioned Sandy Meisner, you worked with at the Neighborhood Playhouse here in New York. Before that, you had grown up in Arkansas, and you knew you wanted to be an actor from a relatively young age. When did you kind of decide that was going to be your goal and your dream?
It's my dad had a series of heart attacks when I was a little girl, and our world was shaped by these huge traumatic events, and by the fact that I spent my childhood waiting for my dad to die, and also by the fact that a doctor who meant well said to the 8-year-old girl, "Now you be good, girl. You behave, and better be nice and quiet around there, because if you don't, your daddy could die." Now, the guy didn't say that. That's what I heard. I don't know what he said, but I heard that. And so from the age of 8, my response to that, insanity was to bury myself in books. That's where I lived. In books, if people died, they could get back up again because it was all magic, or you'd have a cry about them, but you'd go on to another book. And books were my solace and my place where I could be a whole person and get mad and get angry and not make waves and not kill anybody. And then when I grew up, it just was a natural thing to put that on its feet, And so, and to this day, the safest world for me, it's always been this. It's safer for me to be on a stage than to go to a party. And it's like the opposite of. I know it's like crazy because people think, I mean, I'm fairly political person. I've stood up in front of crowds and stuff, and they're like, "How do you do that?" And I go, "Well, that's where I'm safe." Is that fair? So it doesn't make sense on paper, but it makes sense emotionally to me. And even all these years later, even though I understand it, it's just who I am, And so those imaginary worlds became worlds that I wanted to inhabit. Luckily, I have 4 kids who remind me what's real and what's not. Yeah.
When you first came to New York and were waiting tables, and I mean, did you get any advice about, you should change your name, you should lose your accent? I mean, you've seemed to stick to yourself so completely all these years, but were there ever times that you doubted that was the way to go?
Well, my accent was like a lot more like this. And if y'all heard my sister, my family talk, this is how we talk. And it's exactly how I talk after 2 glasses of wine or in a fight. They did at the Neighborhood Playhouse drum it out of me, just so that I could play things other than just Southern characters, which I'm glad of, even though Arkansas sounds good to me too. But wait, what was the other part of that
Changing
question?
your name?
Oh, changing my name happened. Nobody it's weird. Growing up in Arkansas, not one person ever asked me the origin of my name, which I think it just has to do with where you grow up. People know you, so they're not even curious about it. But the day I got to New York, it's like, what kind of name is that? Turns out it's Dutch. But when nobody really asked me to change it until I did my first movie, which was Going South with Jack Nicholson, and the heads of Paramount strongly urged me to change my name. Yes. Well, first of all, they didn't want me anyway. They wanted one of the 5 other actresses, all who'd made movies and who were movie stars, that screen tested for the part. And but Jack felt my screen test was best, so I was the one that got it. But they called me into their office and they said, "We think you should change your name." And I said, "So what?" And they said, "Well, Mary Bergen." And I said, "Well, there's Candace Bergen, Edgar Bergen, Polly Bergen. There's all these, And they were just not pleased with me, but." I thought about Morris Steenburgen, a freight train conductor from North Little Rock, Arkansas, who thought I was the most magical thing in the world just by being a waitress in New York and going after my dreams. And there was no way I was going to not have his name. So I still do. I still faithfully correct people who call it Steenburgen. It's Steenburgen. Thank you.
So I'm assuming then Going South was the role that got you your SAG card, probably, right? It was your first
I
film.
did get my SAG card. Yeah, I did. I was super, super proud of that. I didn't even come close to getting it before that.
And what was working with Jack, being directed by Jack in your first film? I mean, that must have been a little bit intimidating or overwhelming.
Well, I didn't even have a passport. Not only did I not have a SAG card, I didn't have a passport when I got that movie. And it was shot down in Mexico. So I had to get, everything in my life changed. I was living in a 5th floor walk up on East 83rd that the window was busted out and my landlord refused to fix the window. So I'd hammered a piece of plywood over the window because it was freezing. And, I was waiting at places. Some of you may remember they're not there anymore, but at 65th and 1st was Noah's Ark, and 76th and 2nd, which I was at for years, was Hudson Bay Inn. And then in the old days, there were 2 Magic Pans, one on 50s. The one I was at was 57th between 3rd and Lex, and it was French crepes, and I wore this little French outfit. And serve the crepes with the smile of the crepe pointing up. And so I waitressed for almost 7 years, and then did comedy improv at night and at the Manhattan Theater Club, and we eventually became the resident company there. So anyway, you asked me about Jack. I'm so long-winded, but
And John Belushi, too, was also in that
John
movie.
Belushi's
That must
first
have been a lot of fun to
movie.
be
I
on set.
loved him. I really loved him. He was a bit of a hot mess, but I really loved him. He was dear and sweet, and he was wonderful. And Jack was my mentor, and he had me go into a screening room every day for 2 months before we started the movie. I lived at the Chateau Marmont in LA and went to Paramount, and my job was to sit there and stare at the movie screen, and he would come in, show me movies, and then come in at the end of them and give me a tutorial on why that movie was great, like the leading ladies of the movie, how they did what they did. It was like having a private acting class by one of the world's greatest actors. He had just made Cuckoo's Nest. He was the biggest thing in the world. Yeah. And so, literally there was a moment that I remember a night in Mexico, and it was my first night shooting of my life. And I remember reaching over and literally pinching myself because it felt like this might just be the wildest dream I've ever had, And I'll be honest with you, I still feel that I get to do what this incredible profession, which is just a privilege to do. There's so many people that dream of doing it, and I feel so lucky, And by the way, I felt lucky when I was waitressing and doing it because I was in New York City, and occasionally people would come see us, and it was great. So,
Well, the dream continued from there. I mean, you went on, you did Ragtime, and you did Melvin and Howard with Jonathan Demme, who recently passed away. You also worked with him again on Philadelphia. What was he like to work with as a director?
I'll try to answer your question without crying. I'm still reeling. But Jonathan was just a magnificent, enormous spirit. And he, like Demetri Martin or my friend Will Forte, these are people who haven't tried to conform their way of seeing the world into something that feels appropriate to the business or for any reason. And Jonathan would direct you by doing things like, I remember there was a day on Melvin and Howard where we'd been shooting for quite a while, and we were making a movie about the man who claimed to be the heir to the Howard Hughes fortune, and we had been kicked out of our hotel because they didn't like what we were making a movie about, some of the big wigs in Vegas. Anyway, there was just a lot had gone down, and it was toward the end of the movie, and everybody was a little tired and missing home. And I go to work, and we're shooting my wedding that day, and I'm like out to here pregnant, getting married in a wedding chapel in Vegas. And Jonathan comes to work, and he's in this like crazy, fantastic pinstripe suit with a flower in the lapel and like a silk tie and all this. And I'm like, wait, are you doing some kind of interview or something today? And he's like, no. And I said, why are you dressed like that? And he said, I'm going to your wedding. And that was the only direction he had to give me. And suddenly it was like, and I'm going to my wedding too, and it was like he was there to play with you. And I remember also in Philadelphia, every single person in that jury on Philadelphia was hand cast by Jonathan. Even though they might not have lines, he wanted that face to say so much, He also made it clear that everybody on that set, if they had an idea or a suggestion, whoever you are on that set, he wanted to hear it. It wasn't like just let me hear from the producers or the above the line people. He wasn't like that. And he was just a magnificent human being.
And you also won an Oscar for Melvin and Howard. A relatively young age, relatively early in your career. What was that experience like? I mean, was that something that you could prepare for in any way?
Well, how I prepared for it was that I had Lily, my first child, like two and a half months before it. And to be honest with you, I was so I was just so crazy in love with my daughter and with the whole thing of being a mother that I do think it slightly eclipsed the Oscar. Which is in Hollywood almost like a sacrilegious thing to say, but it was magnificent. The film had not even been released in Europe and never did. I don't think it released in Europe, and it hadn't been a big blockbuster success. And the only reason I won that Oscar was that journalists kept telling people to go see that movie. And critics kept telling people to go see the movie. So I don't think I would have won it without them. But it was a thrill. It became very important to me to not only properly thank Jonathan and Sandy Meisner, but also to thank Jack Nicholson, who had nothing to do with that movie, but everything to do with me standing on that stage. So I had to talk really fast, which, for a Southern girl, ain't easy.
And your daughter is now an actress as well, right?
My daughter, she would probably tell you no. Every once in a while she gets asked to do stuff and still does, but she is about to have her third daughter. And she's doing much more interior design. She called me when she was pregnant with her daughter, and she said, I have an audition, during this whole time. And I said, okay. And she said, I need you to know I haven't missed it. And I said, boy, if you don't have to do it, don't do it. Because it's hard, whether you're successful, and it's even harder if you're not, And so, will she ever go back to it? I couldn't speak for her. She was. I thought she was incredible, having seen her both on stage and on film. But we'll see.
And your son Charlie mentioned as a director, and you worked with him recently, right? On the
I did. He
the
just
Discovery.
Yeah, he did a film called The Discovery with that's on Netflix with Rooney Mara and Jesse Plemons and Jason Segel and Robert Redford. And so I had the experience of being directed in a long scene with Robert Redford by my son.
What was that experience like?
My biggest desire, it was his second movie, and he and his writing partner wrote it, and he was directing it. And my biggest thing was, don't let him down, and don't annoy him by like talking about how cute and smart and sweet, and like, don't do any of that. Whatever you do, don't cry. Like, don't do it. And it was a serious scene, so I knew I wouldn't do what I'm pretty famous for on our show, Last Man on Earth, which is ruining takes by giggling. I knew I wouldn't do that. But I was a little nervous about the crying. And so I overlearned my lines. I like had him so down cold, and we started doing it, and we're good. And then all of a sudden we're on a little break, and Bob, as we call him, was looking at his lines, and I was looking at Bob, and all of a sudden I was a young woman in North Little Rock, Arkansas, looking at the movie The Way We Were, And I'm staring at him, and I'm going, how did this happen? How did this ever happen? And the clapperboard, which, is such a part of my life, I don't see it that much anymore. The clapperboard comes down, and I just see under director C. McDowell, and the tears go, and I'm like, oh man. And somehow I like push them back down, which I deserve some sort of award for that. And I got through it, and I didn't say anything until the end of the day when nobody but his first AD was around. And then I went, I really had a moment, Charlie. He's just laughing at me like, I can't believe he made it through the day without crying or something.
And you've also worked with your husband, Ted Danson, several times, including on Curb Your Enthusiasm, which is coming back. And I hear you're going to be back on it, which is very exciting.
Yes.
How do you guys work together and live together? And how do you sort of separate work from home?
Well, we work together all the time, which nobody knows, because our shows are somehow, I don't know how this happened, but we've been shooting Last Man on Earth from like August 1st to February 5th or something. And Ted shoots The Good Place from February 5th to August 1st. So there's never a time when one of us is sort of, we're both free. So what that does mean is that the person who's free has to help the other person learn their lines. So we work together every night, because every night I'm helping him learn his lines, and every night he helps me learn mine when we're shooting. So I really love working with him because he's a freaking ridiculously talented actor, and he inspires me to be a better actor. And he's, I was a fan of his. Anybody that's done comedy and drama knows how much harder comedy is. It's so delicate. It can't be taught. Funny is so individualized. You can't copy it. It's its own really tricky thing. And I used to watch Cheers before I knew him and just marvel at the delicate, beautiful ice skating that he and Shelley and then he and Kirsty did in those boy-girl scenes. And I just always thought it was brilliant. And when I was going through some sad times in my life, that's the show I would watch at the end of the day instead of the news, to make me feel better. And then I just discovered it was just easier to sleep with Sam the bartender.
That's the secret. We only have a few minutes left, but we have some questions from the audience. What are some of the most fascinating people or things you've come across in your character research?
Ooh, what a good question. That's so interesting you asked that, because right now, literally before I was coming here, we're planning a trip for me to go down to the East Texas Bayou, because I actually, another part of my life is that I write music, and I'm writing music for an animated film, and the film is set in the bayou. So I'm going with the writer down to go deep in the swamp and take photos and stare at the critters and all that. Some of the other research, when I did Melvin and Howard, I used to hang out at strip clubs and watch the strippers. And since I played a stripper. And let's see. Well, I could tell you, I think I talked about this recently because of Jonathan's death. But sometimes research comes whether you like it or not. And when we did Philadelphia, just to refresh your memory, if you haven't seen it, I played the lawyer that defends the law firm that fires Tom Hanks, seemingly because he has AIDS and can't work. So I'm the bad guy, and I was, if you were around during that time, you know that we lost tons of friends and people, and that had happened to me. And in fact, that fifth floor walkout with a busted out window, my friend Peter Barkey, who was also in the comedy improv group with us, he had just recently died. He was my roommate in that apartment, and he just passed away, and I was reeling from it. And he knew about me playing this part, and he really wanted me to do it because he said, this is an important film and I want you to go do it. And so I go to get on the plane, and I go to sit down in my seat, and I'm like, I don't believe it, because there was a very gaunt frame and someone who'd lost their hair and had a bandana on his head and very, very thin. And I just thought, oh, wow, I'm going to have trouble holding back the tears on this flight. And the person looked up at me, and it was Tom Hanks. And I couldn't even believe the transformation. He had lost so much weight to play this part, and the depth of his commitment. And within a day or so of that, and we were both flying to Philadelphia, we had to do our first scene together, and it's the only time of my career that I didn't come through. I'm not saying I'm always perfect or great. I'm just saying I literally was a wreck and couldn't hardly do the scene. And so Jonathan sat down with me, and I said, look, I just don't know if I can play this part. And he said, well, let's think about what you're doing. You're not there to make a judgment about AIDS or about people being gay. You're there to uphold justice, because everybody in this country, deserves the best defense possible. And the second he said it, I thought, okay, I know how to play the part. And he added a line that I whisper that some people hear and some people don't. He added the line that I lean down and I say to Oba Baba Tunde, best name ever. I say, God, I hate this case. And that wasn't really in the original script. And he said, "Do you want me to include it?" And I said, "Shoot it and decide for yourself, because I'm over that." Once he told me what he told me, I knew how to play that part. But I was so distraught before that my own feelings were coming in between me and that character.
And last question, since these are all actors here, what's the best piece of advice you've ever gotten from another actor that you can pass along here?
Well, Betty Davis said, "Always take Fountain," which is a street in which is a street in LA that for some reason is always clear.
Betty
So I
Davis
guess
says so,
that's
I
still
believe
it.
Thank you very much. Mary Steenburgen, ladies and gentlemen.